A frantic 911 call cracks the midnight silence. A mother's trembling voice whispers, "Please, send help. There's something in our house." In the background, a chorus of unseen thuds and a man's scream curdle the blood. Moments later, police burst into a quiet suburban home in upstate New York. They find no intruder, only a family paralyzed by terror and a father with fresh bruises on his neck as if strangled by invisible hands. The officers are bewildered. The family is shattered. This chilling incident was not an isolated freak occurrence. It was the climax of months of escalating horror inside a house that many now claim is cursed. What unfolded within those walls would push an ordinary family to the brink of madness. In this documentary-style account, we delve into the harrowing, true-inspired story of the Thompson family and the cursed house in New York that turned their dream home into a living nightmare. Through eyewitness testimony, recovered journals, and investigative records, we piece together a case so disturbing it could happen to anyone, anywhere, even to you. Prepare to enter the shadowy halls of an unassuming home where something ancient and malevolent still lingers. The new home, an ordinary family's dream. In the fall of 2019, the Thompson family, Mark, 42, Sarah, 39, their teenage daughter Emily, 16, and young son Noah, 8, and their loyal dog Max moved from the bustle of New York City to a tranquil town in upstate New York. They settled into a century-old Victorian house on a quiet, tree-lined street. The house at 12 Westvale Drive boasted a wraparound porch, stained glass windows, and plenty of room for the kids to grow. It was, at first glance, a dream home. Sarah fell in love with the house's rustic charm, the carved oak banister, the antique light fixtures, the cozy attic perfect for storage. Mark was thrilled to finally have a big yard where Noah and Max could play. Neighbors welcomed them warmly, though a few gave odd, hesitant smiles when they learned which house the Thompsons bought. One elderly neighbor muttered something about, "That house has history," but said no more. Eager for a fresh start, the Thompsons brushed off the remark. They had no idea of the dark legacy their new home carried. Small items began to go missing and reappear in odd places. Sarah's keys, which she swore she left on the foyer table, would turn up on the kitchen counter or on the floor in the upstairs hallway. Mark teased her about being forgetful. Doors were found ajar that the family knew they had closed. One morning, Emily came down for breakfast frowning in confusion. The door to her bedroom, which she always shut at night, was wide open when she woke up. Minor oddities like these were easy to write off. The kids, perhaps, or the old locks not catching properly. The Thompsons remained rational, attributing everything to natural causes. However, as nights grew longer and winter set in, the occurrences intensified. Faint scratching sounds came from inside the walls, usually around 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour. Mark suspected rodents in the walls. He checked the attic and basement for pests, but found no droppings, no holes, nothing to explain the persistent scratching. They hired an exterminator who found no signs of infestation either. With each passing week, these noises grew louder and more persistent, evolving from scratches to distinct knocking sounds, as if something inside the walls was trying to get attention. Even more disquieting were the whispers. Sarah would be alone folding laundry or washing up at the sink, and she swore she heard someone faintly whisper her name from the next room. Sarah. The first time it happened, she paused, heart skipping, but then shook it off. Maybe it was the wind, or her mind playing tricks in the quiet house. But the whispers continued, just at the edge of hearing. On one occasion, as Sarah dozed off on the couch, she jolted awake to a hushed voice right behind her ear saying, "I'm here." She jumped up, but again found no one. It felt crazy, and she kept these experiences mostly to herself, afraid Mark might think she was imagining things. Bizarre encounters, the haunting takes hold. By December, the paranormal events escalated beyond what could be ignored. Each family member experienced something inexplicable and chilling. Noah's imaginary friend. Noah, the 8-year-old, began talking about an imaginary friend who he said lived in his room. At first, it seemed like normal child's play. Noah named this friend Mr. Whisper. He would babble happily, playing with action figures, and when Sarah asked, he explained he was playing with Mr. Whisper. One night, Sarah overheard Noah whispering, "I can't, I'm not allowed to leave my bed," as if responding to someone. When she asked who he was talking to, Noah innocently replied, "The tall man in the corner." Sarah's blood ran cold. In the corner of Noah's bedroom stood only a coat rack with a hanging coat. She removed the coat, reassuring herself it must have looked like a tall man in the dark. Noah's friend, however, became a source of growing unease, especially when Noah asked if Mr. Whisper could have a seat at the dinner table because he's hungry too. Emily's night terror. One snowy night, Emily awoke just after 2 a.m. to the sound of gentle tapping on her second-story bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. She initially assumed it was a tree branch in the winter wind, but then remembered there was no tree close enough to reach her window. The tapping came again, deliberate and unnerving. Mustering courage, Emily peeled back the curtain. A pale face stared back at her from the other side of the glass, dark, sunken eyes and a twisted grin. She screamed and stumbled backward. In an instant, the window was empty. Mark rushed in to her panicked cries. They found nothing outside but a light dusting of snow on the sill, no footprints on the ground below. Mark reassured Emily it was a bad dream, or maybe a bird, but privately he was disturbed. He could tell from Emily's terror that she'd seen something. That night, Emily refused to sleep alone. From then on, she kept her lamp on until dawn. Objects in motion. The family started finding furniture moved in the mornings. One day, all 4 kitchen chairs were pulled out from the table and turned backwards as if an unseen group had sat there during the night. Another time, a stack of books from Mark's office was neatly arranged in a circle in the living room floor. Most memorably, just before Christmas, Sarah was alone baking cookies when a cabinet door slammed shut on its own with explosive force, as if some invisible hand had angrily swung it. The impact was hard enough to rattle the china inside and send Sarah's heart pounding. She stood in the silent kitchen, cold air now permeating the room, though the windows were closed, and realized with a sinking feeling that something was very wrong with the house. Strange odors and cold spots. A foul odor of decay would waft through the hallway at random times, heavy and revolting, then vanish minutes later. No source was ever found. The trash was empty and the house was clean. Likewise, cold spots moved through the home. The Thompsons would be sitting in the living room when an isolated pocket of frigid air would drift by, like a person walking past them, sending chills racing across their skin. These incidents were no longer subtle. The Thompsons could no longer deny that something unnatural was happening. Mark, a practical man and a skeptic by nature, struggled to find rational explanations. He inspected the furnace, thinking the smell and cold might be ventilation issues, but the HVAC system was fine. He double-checked window seals against drafts. They were secure. When the family sat down to discuss the incidents, each member realized everyone had experienced something inexplicable. A heavy mood settled over them. Mark promised to get to the bottom of it, but Sarah could see the unease in his eyes. Descent into madness, fear, and fractured minds. As winter stretched on, the atmosphere in the Thompson house turned oppressive. What was once a loving home life began to crack under fear. The constant tension of living with an unseen specter took a psychological toll on each of them, manifesting in different, harrowing ways. Sleeplessness and strain. The entire family suffered from chronic insomnia. Jolted awake by phantom noises or nightmares each night, they were exhausted and on edge. Dark circles under eyes, frayed tempers, and paranoia became the new normal. Even on quiet nights, anticipation of terror kept them awake. Every rustle of wind outside or creak of the house set their nerves on edge. They began sleeping together with lights on in the master bedroom on especially bad nights, finding a small measure of comfort just from being close. Mark's deterioration. Mark, once the family's rock, began to unravel under the stress. He became obsessed with catching the pranksters or logical culprit he insisted must be behind the disturbances. He set up a baby monitor and an old camcorder in the hallway, determined to capture evidence of an intruder or even a wild animal wandering in. Nothing showed up on these recordings except the family's own restless movements and, on one tape, the sound of a distant guttural laugh that made Mark's skin crawl. In his frustration and fear, Mark's personality changed. He grew irritable, snapping at the kids for minor things, and fell into bouts of brooding silence. On several occasions, Sarah found him awake at 4 a.m., sitting in the dark living room gripping a baseball bat, staring at the hallway where the footsteps were often heard. He admitted to her in a whisper that he sometimes felt like he wasn't alone even when he was by himself, a sense of an unseen presence looming behind him, watching. Mark's mental state frayed further when he started hearing a voice, a low, insidious whisper that would hiss cruel things like, "Get out," or "hurt them." He didn't tell his family about the voice at first, but the strain showed. The house was preying on him, feeding his fear and rage. Sarah's anxiety. Sarah tried to stay strong for the children, but she was quietly falling apart. Once a cheerful woman, she now walked the halls of her home with shoulders tense, perpetually braced for the next scare. She'd catch herself holding her breath without realizing it. In the evenings, when Mark was withdrawn and sullen and the children hid in their rooms, Sarah felt an overwhelming despair seep into her. She took to nervously twirling the cross on her necklace, something she hadn't done habitually before. Sarah began to fear she was losing her mind, especially after a day in late December when she experienced a terrifying hallucination, or so she thought. While doing laundry in the basement, Sarah saw a shadowy figure in the corner, tall and contorted. It lunged at her and she screamed, falling back against the dryer. In an instant, the figure was gone. No one believed what she saw. Even she wondered if stress was causing her to see things. After that, Sarah refused to go into the basement alone. Her hands would tremble badly, and she often woke up gasping from nightmares of being buried alive within the house's walls. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to be slowly eroding Sarah's sanity, whispering to her in those moments between wakefulness and sleep. Emily's isolation. Emily, the teenager, coped by withdrawing. She spent long hours blasting music in her headphones to drown out the eerie silence of the house. Still, strange occurrences targeted her too. One evening, as she FaceTimed a friend in her dim bedroom, the screen suddenly went static and the lights flickered. Emily's friend later asked, "Who was standing behind you just now?" A question that left Emily shivering because no one had been in the room. Emily started avoiding being home as much as possible, staying late at school for any activity she could. When home, she locked her door and kept her bedside lamp on all night. She scribbled dark, disturbing images in her sketchbook, drawings of a gaunt, faceless figure and a house with black scribbles swirling inside it. Normally social and sunny, Emily became sullen and jumpy, convinced the house or something in it was watching her. She confided to her diary that she felt an urge to hurt herself sometimes, and it scared her. It was as if the despair in the house was contagious, infecting her teenage melancholy and twisting it. Noah's changing friend. Young Noah, perhaps the most vulnerable, underwent an alarming shift. His imaginary friend, Mr. Whisper, went from a playful make-believe companion to a source of constant dread. Noah began having night terrors, waking up screaming that Mr. Whisper is angry. On several occasions, Noah was found sleepwalking. Once, Mark caught him wandering toward the front door at 2 a.m. in the dead of winter. When gently stopped and woken, the boy was disoriented and muttered that he said I should go outside and play. Worse, Noah's once gentle demeanor soured. He had violent outbursts uncharacteristic of a sweet 8-year-old. In one incident, he killed several of his action figure toys, twisting their limbs off, tears in his eyes as he later told Sarah, "I didn't want to, but Mr. Whisper told me I had to or he'd hurt you, Mommy." Those words terrified Sarah. Was something threatening her child, coercing him to act out? Noah often covered his ears and cried that he couldn't get the loud whispers to stop. The family realized with horror that Noah's imaginary friend might be horrifyingly real, and that entity was now directly targeting the children. The Thompsons were collectively near a breaking point. In their desperation, and with nowhere else to turn, Sarah persuaded Mark that they needed outside help. The idea of a haunting, a cursed house was not something Mark wanted to admit, but the evidence was overwhelming that this was beyond their control. Swallowing his pride and skepticism, Mark agreed to seek help for the family's sake. Seeking help, science and faith versus the unseen. In January 2020, the Thompsons sought assistance from multiple fronts, both scientific and spiritual, hoping to reclaim their home and sanity. Medical examinations. First, they visited doctors. The family underwent medical tests to rule out environmental causes for their experiences, carbon monoxide poisoning, mold-induced hallucinations, or mental illness. All tests came back normal. The house was inspected for carbon monoxide leaks and toxic mold. Nothing was found. A psychologist evaluated the family for group hysteria or shared delusions, but found them lucid if deeply traumatized. The rational explanations were falling away, leaving a frightening conclusion. Something paranormal was at work. The priest's blessing. Though not particularly religious, the Thompsons invited Father Michael O'Malley, a local priest, to bless the house. Father O'Malley walked through each room with holy water and a Bible, reciting prayers to cleanse the home. During the blessing, family members huddled together, watching anxiously. At first, it was quiet, almost too quiet, but as the priest entered the master bedroom, a hotspot of activity at night, the atmosphere changed. The warm air turned bitingly cold in an instant. All at once, a chorus of knocks rang out through the walls, a rapid knocking from every direction that caused Father O'Malley to falter mid-prayer. Emily let out a sob and clapped her hands over her ears. The priest later confessed it felt as if something was mocking us. He persevered, raising his voice in Latin incantations. Suddenly, a framed family photo on the dresser flew off and shattered on the floor. Startled, Father O'Malley finished the blessing hastily. With a pale face and shaking hands, he advised the Thompsons to keep faith and be strong. But privately, he admitted to Mark, "In all my years, I have never felt such an oppressing presence. It's beyond what I can handle alone." It was a chilling admission from a man of God. Paranormal investigators. Next, the Thompsons reached out to the Hudson Valley Paranormal Society, a team of professional ghost hunters and researchers akin to those seen on paranormal investigation docuseries. The team, 3 investigators armed with cameras, audio recorders, and EMF, electromagnetic field detectors, arrived on a frigid January evening. They interviewed the family extensively, taking notes of every claim. Noah was too young and frightened to speak much, but Emily and her parents recounted their ordeal in detail on camera, voices trembling with emotion. "I felt like I was losing my mind," Sarah admitted, "waking up every night with whispers and footsteps. It wears you down." The investigators set up their equipment after dusk, night vision video cameras in the hallway and living room, digital voice recorders in the children's bedrooms, and EMF meters throughout the house. The family stayed overnight at a neighbor's at the team's urging, as the investigators wanted to provoke activity without putting the Thompsons in danger. What the team captured that night defies explanation. Reviewing the footage and audio the next day, the lead investigator showed Mark and Sarah some findings with a grave face. On a camera facing the empty hallway, around 2:55 a.m., there was movement, a dark, indistinct figure peeking out of Noah's bedroom door, then ducking back in out of sight. But Noah's room was empty. No one was there. It wasn't a trick of light. The figure had form, height, around 6 feet tall, and deliberate motion. "We've never caught something so clear," one investigator remarked, visibly unnerved. On another camera in the living room, a heavy armchair slid 2 feet across the floor on its own at 3:10 a.m., as if shoved by an invisible force. There were EVP recordings, electronic voice phenomena as well. In the dead silence of Noah's empty room, the recorder picked up a faint voice. When amplified, they heard a raspy whisper, "Noah, come play." Sarah broke down in tears hearing this, and Mark clenched his fists, eyes wide with fear and anger at this unseen tormentor targeting his child. The lead investigator concluded, "Your family is dealing with an intelligent haunting, possibly demonic in nature given the malevolence. This is no mere ghost of a deceased person. It feels far more sinister." They suggested a more extreme measure, a house cleansing or exorcism by specialists, and in the meantime strongly advised the Thompsons to leave the house for a while. "I've been investigating hauntings for 20 years, one team member said, "and I can honestly say this is one of the most dangerous environments I've ever encountered. Whatever is here doesn't want you here, and it may not let you leave easily." Haunting history, unearthing the house's dark past. Determined to understand what cursed their home, Sarah and Emily dove into researching the house's history while staying temporarily with a relative. Late nights at the local library and records office uncovered a disturbing timeline of tragedies associated with 12 Westvale Drive, a history that had been all but forgotten or deliberately hushed by the community. The further back in time they dug, the clearer it became that the Thompson family's experiences were part of a pattern. The house had long been a magnet for darkness. Through old newspapers, town records, and an old leather-bound diary discovered in the attic, they pieced together the following harrowing chronicle of the house's past. 1904, the Harper tragedy. The house's first owners, Jonathan and Marjorie Harper, moved in with their 3 young children. Within a year, their 4-year-old daughter fell gravely ill. Marjorie wrote in her diary of the girl's delirious ravings about a shadow man who wanted to take her away. The child died inexplicably, and Jonathan Harper reportedly went mad with grief. He was found one night in the attic, babbling about darkness in the walls before he took his own life. Marjorie Harper sold the house shortly after, convinced something evil had caused their misfortune. 1931, disappearance. A subsequent owner, Eleanor Reese, a widowed schoolteacher, rented out rooms in the house. 2 of her tenants, young brothers, vanished without a trace in November 1931. Eleanor claimed to investigators that the men had been consumed by the house. Considered unstable, she was sent to an asylum. The missing brothers were never found. Neighbors whispered that Eleanor practiced occult rituals, trying to communicate with spirits in the house. 1960, the Carter family flees. In the late 1950s, the Carter family, a couple with a newborn baby, moved in. They abruptly fled the house in 1960, leaving furniture, clothes, and personal items behind, as if they left in a great hurry. A newspaper clipping from that year quotes Mrs. Carter saying, "The house wouldn't let our baby sleep. We had to get out to save ourselves." They never spoke in detail about what happened, but locals noted that Mr. Carter, formerly a jovial man, looked broken, a shell of himself afterwards. 1978, ritual in the basement. In 1978, police records show that authorities were called to the house when a new owner went missing. a reclusive man named Gerald Horvath. In the basement, officers found a strange scene: a circle of melted candles, occult symbols painted on the walls in what appeared to be blood, and a journal with incoherent ramblings about making a pact. Horvath was never found. Many believed he summoned something in that basement, something that remained behind. 1994, the Peterson death. The most recent incident before the Thompsons was in 1994. Alan Peterson, a quiet retiree who lived alone in the house, was found dead at the bottom of the staircase. The coroner ruled it a fall, but the odd details made the local news. Peterson had deep scratches on his face and neck, and neighbors reported he'd complained about voices at night and believed something was after him. His death was officially an accident, but those who knew the history believed otherwise. This string of tragedies painted a clear picture. Anyone who lived in that house faced horror. Whether an evil entity was attached to the property or the accumulation of grief and violence had birthed a curse, one thing was certain: the Thompsons had unwittingly stepped into a long lineage of terror. Sarah even found an old photograph in the town archives, a 1920s grainy image of Westvale Drive. In the upstairs window of their house, a smudge could be seen that resembled a tall figure watching. It gave her chills. Emily discovered a note in Marjorie Harper's diary that resonated with their own experiences. "There is a darkness here that feeds on sorrow and fear. It wants the children. I fear we cannot escape it." This century-old warning could have been written by Sarah herself in 2019. Armed with this knowledge, the Thompsons felt a mix of validation and dread. They now knew the enemy, an ancient dark presence tied to the house through ritual and blood. But knowing its history did not guarantee they could defeat it. Still, Mark and Sarah resolved that they would not become the next tragic entry in the house's ledger. It was time to take back their home, or, if that failed, to escape it forever. Against the advice of the investigators and their own fears, the Thompsons decided to return to their home one last time, intent on confronting whatever dwelled there, or at least gathering their belongings to finally leave for good. They were simply unwilling to let the entity keep everything they owned. Accompanied by 2 members of the paranormal team for support and documentation, the family stepped into their house on a frigid February evening, hearts pounding. The plan was to quickly pack essentials and important items, then leave and arrange a sale of the house later, likely at a loss, but their lives mattered more than money. Little did they know, the house had other plans. From the moment they entered, it felt like walking into a lion's den. The air was thick and heavy, breathing came hard. The investigators immediately noted EMF readings spiking on their meters, indicating unusual electromagnetic activity. As they moved from room to room, packing in haste, the oppressive feeling grew. It was as if the house was watching and waiting. Everything happened at once, in a chaotic blur, as the entity made its final violent stand. Lights out. The lights throughout the house began to flicker erratically, then one by one overhead bulbs burst, popping in showers of sparks. Within seconds, the house was plunged into dimness, lit only by the investigators' camera lights and a few flickering candles Sarah had lit for calm. In that sparse light, shadows swelled unnaturally long on the walls. Isolated and targeted. Suddenly, a thunderous slam echoed. The front door crashed shut on its own, as if something wanted to seal them all inside. Mark and the investigator with him in the living room tried the door. It was stuck fast, refusing to open. Another investigator, who was upstairs with Sarah and the kids, shouted in alarm. The door to Noah's bedroom, where they were collecting the children's clothes, had also slammed shut, locking them in. For a moment, the family was divided. Mark downstairs banging on the front door, and Sarah with the kids trapped upstairs. Fear surged. Being separated made them feel vulnerable to attack. The apparition. In the chaos, Max the dog started barking ferociously at something in the dark hallway. Following Max's gaze, Mark and the investigator turned to see what he was barking at, and there it was, a tall, shadowy figure at the end of the hallway near the base of the stairs. It was humanoid but distorted, its form blacker than the darkness around, with elongated limbs. Its face, if it had one, was indiscernible except for 2 pinpoints of burning red light where eyes might be. Max growled and then whimpered, slinking back. The creature moved, not walking but gliding a few feet closer without a sound. Mark's blood ran cold. His legs felt rooted to the spot. The investigator, voice shaking, called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The only response was a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the walls. Physical assault. As Sarah, upstairs, frantically jiggled Noah's door handle to escape and join Mark, she suddenly felt a vice-like grip on her hair, yanking her backward. She fell to the floor, screaming. Emily and Noah cried out as Sarah was dragged by an unseen force across the bedroom floor. The investigator upstairs rushed to grab her, and just as quickly the force released its hold, leaving Sarah sobbing and clinging to the kids. Later, she would find a clump of her hair torn out. It was as if the entity wanted to show its dominance. They were at its mercy. Possession or influence. Mark, upon seeing his wife attacked, roared in anger and charged toward the shadowy figure, brandishing the baseball bat he'd kept at hand. But as he approached, the figure disappeared into thin air. Mark staggered, suddenly disoriented. According to the investigator beside him, Mark's expression changed in that instant. His eyes took on a faraway look as if he weren't entirely himself. Without warning, Mark turned the baseball bat on the investigator, swinging with a snarl. He barely missed the man's head, smashing a lamp instead. The investigator yelled, trying to snap Mark out of it. Mark's face twisted with rage not his own, raising the bat again. It took the distant sound of his children screaming upstairs and Sarah calling his name for Mark to hesitate. He blinked, confusion flooding his face as he seemed to regain control, dropping the bat with a clatter. He had no memory of what he was doing in those few seconds, a possible moment of partial possession by the entity, a last attempt to sow violence. Escape. Seizing the brief lull, the group regrouped. The upstairs door mysteriously unlocked on its own, allowing Sarah, Emily, Noah, and the upstairs investigator to dash down to the foyer. Mark, shaken back to his senses, grabbed them all towards the now yielding front door. As if relenting, the heavy door that wouldn't budge minutes before swung open easily. They fled out into the icy night, stumbling onto the front lawn. Behind them, the house stood silent and still, its dark windows like vacant eyes. Then, from an upstairs window, Noah's room, a pale figure could be seen watching them, the spectral outline of a man with glowing eyes and a crooked grin. Emily saw it too and screamed. The figure slowly raised one hand, pressed against the glass, almost in a mockery of a wave or a farewell. In the next blink, it was gone. The final night in the house lasted only minutes, but to the Thompsons it felt like a never-ending nightmare. They escaped with their lives shaken to the core, leaving behind suitcases, boxes, and their cursed home for good. For the Thompsons, there was no going back. They would never again spend a night under that roof. Aftermath, lingering darkness, and an eerie twist. The Thompsons never returned to 12 Westvale Drive, except in nightmares. They moved in with Sarah's sister in a neighboring state for a while, eventually deciding to start fresh far away. In the months that followed, they attempted to make sense of their experience and recover emotionally. The story of their haunting quietly spread through the town, though the family largely avoided media attention, sharing details only with this documentary-style account under changed names. Neighbors whispered that the Thompsons had been chased out by the same curse that had haunted that house for generations. Officially, the house at 12 Westvale Drive went up for sale, but no buyers ever came forward. It stands vacant to this day, its windows collecting dust. Locals say that sometimes, at night, lights flicker on and off in the empty house, or a silhouette appears in an upstairs window for a moment. Teenagers daring each other on Halloween walk up to the porch only to flee after hearing a knock from inside or seeing a shadow move past a curtained window. The house has gained a reputation as the cursed house of Westvale, and many believe the evil within simply lies in wait for its next occupants whenever they may come. The town, once keen to forget the dark history, now speaks of it in hushed tones as one of those unexplainable true horror stories. As for the Thompsons, the ordeal left deep scars. Mark underwent therapy for trauma and guilt, haunted by how close he came to harming someone under the entity's influence. Sarah struggles with anxiety and panic if she hears even a settling noise in any house. Emily sleeps with a lamp on to this day and refuses to discuss the face she saw in the window, trying to bury the memory. Young Noah, despite his age, perhaps bore the worst of the psychological brunt. He needed counseling to distinguish imaginary fears from reality again. Over time, they have improved, but none of them will ever be the same. And then came the final twist, the moment that suggests their nightmare might not be entirely over. About a month after moving into a new home far away, Sarah was tucking Noah into bed. It was a peaceful night, and for the first time in a long while she felt a sense of relief that her family was safe. As she started to turn off Noah's bedside lamp, her son looked past her into a corner of the room and smiled softly.